跟罗拉几几的，这没有我是养殖的人子，我是龙井嘛，可能就里面人会小拉给小菜，这是哦，对呢，那么长嘛拉是，这是的了的，咱们这些个有，开发的的人，养殖啊，做个娘的，你养老东巴当这位，你老中介啊当这。这样，第次这样，Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa当时，第次已经差不多真行了。马这点子让这种话的，他妈的这是的了，有是。
So Khenpo has just recited a verse of praise to Jigme Lingpa, the source of love and compassion for all beings, who knows all that is knowable. You are the emanation of Longchenpa, and heir to a treasury of mind dharmas. Skylight Yogin of the vast expanse of luminosity, Jigme Lingpa, at your feet I pray. So Khenpo is very happy for this opportunity to be together with everyone again for the Dharma. And the teaching today will be going through the 7 branches of devotional practice in relation to the Ngondro, and then especially looking at the life and the blessing of Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa. Today is a special anniversary for him.
Oh, yeah. Chỉ đang cái ngã cho tiền cái lô trong cái năng tuần để yan lạc đầm baris, ta yan na yang karsan ni mà khai sinh huân là thế này, catering cái ngã là thế này, ta Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa cái ta thì cái nhà ngân linh thì bị tuyệt sinh đấy, thì như một cái ngành rễ house, anh ấy bây giờ bỏ rễ house, thế là hiện tại đây là mixer cái chỗ rằng một cái gì á, Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa đang chơi với cái gì, hiện US songs, last songs, anh ấy nghe thế bây giờ bọn tôi nghĩ rằng Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa đang chơi với thằng này, cảm ơn thế tôi xin là giờ bọn tôi告诉爸爸的这个语言，可以让把言。
And so generally today's main topic is the 7 branches, in the Ngondro practice. But some time ago, Catherine spoke to Khenpo and pointed out that today, the day of the teaching, is this anniversary of Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa's passing into Parinirvana. And wouldn't it be wonderful, could Khenpo sort of give this teaching, but also in the context of this anniversary? And Khenpo said, yes, of course, he'd be very happy to teach this sort of in the context of this special day for Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa.
Đi nào đi yang, bên na bao trung quân rồi, làm gì làm cho tăng trí vì thích để cho giang nhung nhung cái yếu na, đi nào na. Hiệp chắc bộ chân đi sống yếu đấy, cái gì sống yếu đấy na, làm mà cũng nhận linh đi bị tuyệt sinh đấy là mixer cái chỉ đơn đẳng chụp phim là mixer cái sonam đẳng phá hình chim bộ yếu bà đấy sống yếu đấy.
And it said in Patrul Rinpoche's Guru Yoga practice, in very specific detail, that on the anniversary of the passing into nirvana of a guru, that the practice we do, the offerings we make, the prayers have a very special merit that is made at that time.
Chidang ke ngachut boken kipa geden chube ke song yore. Kong Sri Lanka te so la phep di ge tani tomba nyang lin di ko mo bo yang de. Bo ba te zu te ra mo bo yang men de. Te kare yana su. Yana ya. Bo ba ge ni nam jin ko gomba te so ge ni ro tang te so la par chi ta na lama kun chung yi gap de za ching bo zi yo ma mang cha. Kun di bi gap de be za ching bo zi ni lo ta ba di dim chu cho ni ni ji zhen ji ya din ji ge lu su ji yo des.
And the great Tibetan scholar Gendin Chupal traveled to Sri Lanka and noticed that they have many statues, images of the Buddha passing into parinirvana. And he looked back at Tibet and recognized that they do not. And he wondered, why is that? But then he also recognized that in Tibet, while they do not really celebrate the birthdays of great gurus, they do often have these ceremonies to mark the passing of a guru, the Demchok, the parinirvana. So even in Tibet is specially celebrated.
Tela Jimson Beach, Karsegora, the song of Nyamlin down, Lami Nanjur Nyamlin, Chawala Muzan Jetang, 当这如头的用有的是，七瓦是话的了，我真接当。
And so there's actually, a very special reason for this, when it comes to secret Mantrayana practice, in particular the Guru Yoga pathway, that the reason is in there.
강에서 나 Dzogchen 친구 냠는 그 찬토휴 대 아니 그 냥을 린디피가스 출기 양스 탐로요 봐. 근데 이제 무슨 지게요 그래서. 아까 zuku대 주구잉스 탐로와 근데 이제
And because in Dzogchen, when somebody's most accomplished in Dzogchen, it's at the moment of their death that they dissolve into the Dharmakaya.
아니 치와 가스 치와 워서 추기가 원의 제바세니 아니 지금 방 투슈 냠랭데 라마군이나 치와 워서 가스 제게 요레스.
And that it's at the moment of death that it's that clear light of the Dharmata, the Dharmakaya, that they're completely in union with.
아니 따팀 우니 때다 요사리스 때는 나랑 게 자월라만 캄보 추첩 세상 캄보 추첩 당들이 이제나 발라 동지시에스.
And so this is probably true. Khenpo knows this from experience with his own guru, Khenpo Chuchap from Serta Larungar.
No Larungar, it's Lundogar as other gar.
Lundagar, okay. So okay. From Lundugar.
Okay. Khampo Chuchap. Okay, Chuchap chapter. Peta Tachimboris, Dito Malariba Nazi is a paper Chaterwa. But the Yamlin Chimbushi Yoris.
So he's a great yogi, this Khenpo Chuchap, Khenpo's guru. He was likened to Jetsu Milarepa. He was beyond all activity, fully realized.
And
when he passed, Khenpo saw just that.
아니 콘냥을 디바데 니마 섬근혼라 공기 추송고 요래 치근라 공로 야 다다 야치 선저비요래 강다량 콘 추송 아니 때의 참바로 지금 나는 때의 지금요 아니 니마 제이 섬라 나서자 니 니마 섬라 나서자 니 니마 섬바 인공 동레스 인공 그샤.
And 3 days before this Khenpo passed, he maybe had like a cold, a little bit sick with a cold, but he was giving teachings on the throne. And then for 3 days he was resting, and in the afternoon of the third day he passed.
아니 디캅스타 콘냥을 린디 옛날에 디캅스 콘죽사가 파 타랑보시다요 말에 리지그 강을 리트지요레스 리트.
So where he stayed was not very far away. It was in a hermitage, a mountain hermitage.
Tena lamaza dong kunsal se lamajiore dong kunsal mingla kunsal la dong se de ruins are dong kunsal se lamajiore ku kotsi kengbo de는 참라 주그리스 단 참라 중에 로 유럽주 숨주 유럽주 되는 주그리스.
And so in a mountain hermitage not far away was a lama named Dung Kunsal. His family name was Dung and the lama's name was Kunsal, Dung Kunsal, and he'd been in retreat for about 40 years.
아니 콘테 뺀 참아주 참짱짱 리처다 손들이 말 연구 말이다 돈다 가려요나 연구 말와 마요디 캄보 추적과 딱바 빼 그렇잖아 그래 그렇잖아 그래 마신 캄보 추적과 라마 참아까지 난 그래 요나 라마 때라 그렇잖아 그래서 토리슈라 야로 참나 말 연구 말 코너진 거리서 그래.
And so he never left the hermitage, this lama. He was always there. Sometimes yogis might come down for certain reasons, but he never did. And Khenpo Chuchap would often scold other lamas and criticize, but to this Lama Kunsal, he never did. He only praised him because he never came out of retreat. And he said, we should all be like that.
아니 Khenpo Chuchap 그 시작바다냐면 동 Kunsal 그 콩라 빼 토갈 그 나와 망보샤니 takchu 토갈 요르와 토갈 그 나와 아니 직거당 이게당 필리당 덴티가 나와 빼 니마마 볼라 샤근도 송레스 때문에 콩그 송레 아티카서 콩콩로 야추 급실라 펩차교가 마리톳 바르와 콩페 냠는 바레 아니 캄보추죠 것이 어디고 콩그 냠는데 빼 찬토보야 차가스나라 콩 덴티가 틱리당 꼬당 덴티가 토갈 그 나와데서 빼 망보 샤송송 콩그 송레스 나수 고레스.
And when Khenpo Chuchap passed in that afternoon, at that time, Khenpo Dung Kunsal, the Lama in the hermitage, experienced a real proliferation of his Togal visions. So visions of like Tigle and sacred letters and shapes. So there were these really strong Togal experiences that he started to have just at the time that his teacher had passed.
Donc, quand on regarde la samajuni loy son chigipchiri, kaptuklan dera chiyo marite, yena ya lama chikte nangyang chudikala tumsodi, teni jamba ga tendri nyamlen ga tokba chimbo yobate so la pansan chigla connection changdo yosaris.
And so Khenpo Chuchap was in the monastery, and then the Lama Kunsal was this yogi who had been 40 or some years in the mountain hermitage, and they had no actual like in-person much connection at all. But when Khenpo Chuchap passed, because his mind stream just completely merged with the Dharmakaya, then on a very subtle level, there was a very direct connection happening between the two.
옛날에 저들이 효요마 때 정정 강에서는 소소라 냠는 때 요나 배는 니마 샤리오디 추가와 요나 디나라 니마가 중인데 샤 강요나 디강라 니마 샤가나 인진이 아니 데리 소소 그 줄라 다바당 냠는 요나 니 라마가 두지데 딘진 포로 요레스.
And Khenpo, who was teaching us here, he was in front of Khenpo Chuchap. He was right next to him, very close when he passed, and he did not experience anything like this. And it goes to show that it's really at the level of one's practice in our mind stream. It's like the sun, wherever there's water, wherever there's a crystal, the sun will reflect in those places. So it's the level of our practice where that connection really occurs.
근데 그친 롱첸 좀 조던가 나라야 다가랑 송요. 난줄 조바 전부가 난줄 바시 추니사서는 초르니로와. 코랑 그다가 나양서 졸세거래 낭인 낭기양 다 다르마카야와 인 다르마 인사이드 그 다르마카야 가리나 낭인서 졸어도 더니 앞에나 상지학자답에 충고로 담보송어디 그 개홍아데 일찍 매직 그 졸탑이야지 거라 대 낭인 강삭 섬동 똥딱 섬데 남주로와 때 낭기 냠는 그 땅에 낭양서 텀니 리빵 원도 줄디 나 강삭 섬동데 졸저요서 데리송.
And it said in the 7 treasuries that, a real Dzogchen yogi, when they get to that level of the 4 visions, when the dharmatas, all is exhausted in the dharmata, and that there's this complete merging with the inner space, the so-called inner space, really that dharmakaya nature of mind, this kind of enlightenment. It's very similar to what Shakyamuni Buddha said to his first 5 disciples, that when any being is fully enlightened, there will be 3,000 yogis in the universe that will experience it.
아니 고난비 전랍대 믹스를 준주기하고 들리게 땡들이오레스 어디 점정그 원원지 공만 남기야 된다라 난거 요레스.
And so even if we don't have the good karma to be present with an enlightened being when they're passing, because of the blessing, because of how things work in this way, if we're able to heed these parinirvana anniversaries and really merge with those times in our practice, it has this sort of effect.
Khenpo Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa yana ta dzogpa chimbu tambi shingta. Wo kanjeng ge jong kan jir Nyingmapa dzogpa chimbu tamba la ka den chibi. Tani kenchen yis da tang sang kenchen yis song yo. Di na ge jig res. Kenchen yi.
It said that in Tibet there were 4 great charioteers, sort of chariot riders of Dzogchen, and Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa is one of those 4.
Jigde Ronzum Pantitari, Jigde Longchenpa Jamje, Jigde Mupum Rinpoche, Jigde Jigme Lingpa Sydney, Namjun Nyingmapa Tradition Lapindu, Gunchin Namji Sydney, and this song. Gunchin Siwate, Ta Shirop Chat Toshu with Chito Jigres.
It said, especially in the Nyingma school, that there are the 4 kunkin meaning all-knowing, really that highest level of of wisdom. And the four are Rongzom Pandita, and Longchen Rabjam, and Nipa Rinpoche, and Jigme Lingpa.
캬퍼드 족바 친구 담바 롱친 닝티크 담반달라 망액그데요르와 셈데 롱르데 망액그데 망액그데 세바데 족친 데숨 그는 그 망액그데가 담발라 딱 근킨 야시 세니 롱친 람좀당 징밀링바니가 냠드 체냠드 요조 디디가 자치버레스.
And then within, more specifically in the Longchen Ningtik teaching, and you have those three classes of teaching, the mind class and the class of space and the class of pith instruction. Within the class of pith instruction, it's said that there is the father and the son that are almost considered as one, and that's Longchen Rabjam and Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa.
Yeah. And terang ngaso kongki dimchuk nyimola chuhiaya denguni karwazam ngaso chabardendi 나나 망체와된 믹서 그 중간적 닝마 근전 yapsi 시고 자신부 대 추주임 비차니 야 믹서 그배 가라장 부차송스.
And so therefore we're really quite fortunate, being followers of the Nyingma lineage, that on a day like today, this anniversary of Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa's passing, that we can be gathered in the Dharma like this.
제성 가서 통마델란 jigme lingpa korte자시 시작이인스.
So first, Khenpo will just talk a little bit about Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa.
단 jigme lingpa 때 당보 때 그런 통사 때 위장 그 초르스.
So first he was born in central Tibet.
아니 종종 그 값이 콩 잡아서니다 랍드 종이 되는 곰바노 휴사티 나라 파리 곰바라 파리 곰바.
As a child, he was ordained as a monk, and he was learning at Pari Monastery.
파리세라데 저당 빙하모였나 완전 닝마 빼곰바 짜친부시.
So at that time, it was considered by the Nyingmas a very sacred monastery.
닝마라 단사 친부 쭉 세와시요. 단사 쭉.
There are 6 seats, or monastic seats, within the Nyingma school.
아니 디나 닝하모 저야 룩서다 등성에 대해서라고 말해. 등성때 희심 곰바데 저기 파리 곰바데 저기 다 그것은 그 뒤축고 왕기 찍대 냠 찍대야 다르고디 대랑생 그래. 너무 옛날 파리 곰바데 징밀릉바 자바 낭사게 디 곰바데 디 닝마 곰바 친구 죽거나 찍. 단사 죽.
So those 6 seats of the Nyingma lineage are a little bit different today than they maybe were considered in old history. So today, Shechen Monastery is considered one of the 6, but at the time of Jigme Lingpa, Pari Monastery was considered one of the 6.
돈나 돈은 빠슴 만나 까비 적성 그러와. 그래도 돈나 저는 그 돈나 저거 가토 말이 도르제다 민들링 파리 섬 매 시나말 감촉다 매라고 돈매 매나더니 가토 파리요 조신.
So it's said that these 6 monasteries are sort of classed within the geography of Tibet, Upper Tibet, Lower Tibet, and so forth. And those of more Upper Tibet was Dorje Drak, the monastery of Dorje Drak, and then Mindroling Monastery and Pari Monastery. And then at that time of the lower parts of Tibet was Kato and Bayu Monastery and Dzogchen Monastery.
Jigme Lingpa 자신부 창로야 돼요. 디 단사 친구 지금 배우양 디 치바라고 나 된리 말이스.
But he wasn't considered a renowned figure at the time. He wasn't enthroned or anything like that.
워낙 강해서나 Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa 때 다디 나라된 그런 게 롭종아 시작하고 나뇨 말시. 희자인 rambo 죽니 롭종 나긴데나 말이스.
And he hadn't studied for a very long time. He hadn't gone to a shedra or anything like that.
제당게 냥마테 zonsamsam을 보십해야 된다지 요레스. 나서 바이 그 지금 라마긴고야 감바 정말 보십지해야 요레스.
There's a hambashe though.
함바셔야 요레스. 나한테 뭘 함바셔는 득제가 말이 돼. 가서 같이 카푸로 지켜야 요레스.
So sometimes those old lamas tend to be a little bit boastful, really kind of blow up and emphasize all the great qualities in education. But it's not a completely meaningless boasting, actually.
So Rigpa de Ngoshin is Nyamlen de Yona, Don La Nipi Dangina, Silla Chutin Dor. Don Nilukun Rango Shisona, Sydney Chubit Tamadorion Guyore, Pena Jigme Lingpa, Servando, Mavon Ramboche, Servando, Mancha de Rosumba, Tomago, Lojo Yana Martin, Kipa Chibu Chayore. The Dzogchen Nyamlen down the Royal Song Yoris.
And in the Nyingma lineage, generally, they don't spend many long years debating and really honing on the fine philosophical points of the Dharma as their main education. Rather, they start from the practice, trying to really understand it in terms of Rigpa, from their experience. But it's said, there's a saying that once they know that one nature of mind, then all of the knowledge is just expanded and sort of opens like a treasure box. So if you look at great masters like Longchenpa and Jigme Lingpa, they didn't actually do so many years of formal philosophical studies, yet they had such great knowledge. And it's said that comes from their Dzogchen realization.
Oh, there are Jigme Lingpa Kiba Changdoa de Ye, Zobacho Nyamling Dang Kertoji. Nang Nyamling Doji, Ranging Rigpi Zam, Jimbi Zam the Drolni, Jimba Zam the Drolni, the Kibacha Sojuris.
So Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa was a good example of this, that he didn't do a lot of formal studies, but because of his yogic practice, it said that the expression of Rigpa was completely free, and he was able to untie the sort of prana knots, the psychic knots in his throat chakra for his speech.
Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa dansa de chung data yang Tsering Jong servite dansa de la dansa tabni juris.
Tsering Zong.
Jong.
Tsering Jong.
Ahi Jong da Jong Jigbare. Jong Tsering Jong.
That's all. And it said that the place where Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa abided most of the time was a place called Tsering Jong, the valley of Tsering Jong.
Ani tahati kasto de Konkoloma Tabu Kumbo, Talasaga, Chitikas, Chipumbo Chimbo, Gelukpa, Gishi, Mambo Konkoloma Charis.
And he had many disciples from all walks of life, some very highly educated, some like political leaders and Geshis from the Gelugpa school and so forth.
Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa ga Rangnam ga nangla songyo, Rangnam Kongrang ti nangla Kong ga nam tar ga nangla. Te Kong ki Yondan Rombo Chinzo, Yondan zo. Tsawa dang Jerba ni ga tsam. Tani ti Gelugpi Seranji Ponte so ga Gishi tin di tang. Oh. Namoy na ting Nyingma se wadi chik taga tang chik nga dong chogan dong dong chik ton dong ton ma chani tin dang kipa ma to jamba. Tin ri ang sa bo yo pa hagu me de Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa ga Yondan Rombo Chinzo cha ni nga hang sang song ni ni la de koran Jigme Lingpa lo ma chi ya pa ma bu yoris.
It's said in Jigme Lingpa's own autobiography that he composed a scripture called the Yontenzo, the Treasury of Qualities, and that some members of the Gelugpa school, when they first read this Yontenzo, or the Treasury of Qualities, the root text and the commentary, they were quite mind-blown, because they thought that the Nyingma school was just, all they spent their time doing was a lot of puja and sort of ritual practice with the instruments, but they weren't very knowledgeable about the points of knowledge. And when they read this book of Jigme Lingpa's, their minds were turned around and they became his followers.
Ta terang kitso go ngi hya to mar mar to pen na Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa go Yondan zo lan Jerpa zong ken Gelugpi Gishi tin di yang chong yo.
And that you even had Gelugpa Geshis that made that would write commentaries afterwards on the Yontenzo, on the Treasury of Qualities that Jigme Lingpa wrote.
This is the Sakya Goma, the Kap de Sakya Gong. Sakya Gomba, Sakya that Dongsi Dang, Chinzen Dang, Chiwa Dang, Dijik de Dang. This is the Gargut Bag, Lama, Chabar Dun Rugong. Dzogchen karju tawi na ta tsoma te Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa lo mamangbo chagyoris.
And many disciples followed Jigme Lingpa, from all schools like the Sakya, even from the Sakya Treason cohort and from the Kagyu school, particularly the Drikung Kagyu, many disciples followed him.
Na ni tingdu don chinzi shi dorje te Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa yangsir kong chongsa te ngolok la chong yana kong lasa la ya danjin shu ni ta po chong chong zhukung wenzhen che ne chong de ge zhukung la yang danjin shu de zhukung ke jasi dang ta ji mang bo da bo jam ni de zhukung koran ge yang rang ge zao la ma na yin zi ga de.
Khenpo knows this because Do Khyentse Yeshe Dorje, who's considered a Yangtze, a Tuku of Jigme Lingpa, was born in Golok in eastern Tibet, and he would travel to Lhasa and be invited to a Drikung Kagyu monastery and be considered like a root guru of their lineage. And then what to say of the Nyingma school? Of course, there were many great masters who were Jigme Lingpa's disciples, including Patra Rinpoche and Gyalwe Nyugu and many others.
Kyapar dan Jigme Lingpa la Roma meji Jigme ke mingyo jin Jigme chanjin ji se wa ka dak chimbo ji Roma ji shong res Jigme nam ji.
But most especially they were considered 4 heart disciples of Jigme Lingpa, and they were given the name of Jigme. So they're called the 4 Jigmes.
Jigme Tenli Oser do Dzogchen Kumchang Tangbo and then Nipa then Jigme Gyalwe Nyugu, Golong Jigme Nguntsar, Bachong Jigme Gocha, Lo and Jigme Kundurse, something I know that is sheep in the Yoris.
Sumbati? Sen Karereki? Sumbati?
Jigme Gocha.
Gochar.
Gocha Sena Gocha. Ganro Gocha, Chajangbar, Gocha.
Yeah, so those 4, I'm going to miss one here, but the first is, so the first Dodrupchen Rinpoche Trinli Ozer, it was Jigme Trinli Ozer, there was Jigme Gyalwa Nyugu, and then Jigme Bachung Gochar.
Jigme Gocha, yeah, Bachung Jigme Gocha.
Bachung Jigme Gochar, and?
Jigme Ngontsar Jamso. Golong Jigme Ngontsar.
Okay. Just as Khenpo said, that's his name.
Yeah. And that then Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa here Dzogchen because mixer ke kam dang amdo go shop. Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa la dorna chimbo chesha.
And during his lifetime, there were many people in Kham and Amdo that really had great devotion to Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa.
And then Jigme Lingpa ga sombam yongs zogba de derge ni hingper la ko. Because ta lasa ni derge kache thagram bo yore. Ani hingper ko char di ga teni par jam ni te Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa kum da la ya khor yong ta dendare. Ta te ge hingper ke hing changma de chirang la ya khor go na nga so kham ni dege ni ya chirang la ya phi yang la. Jigme Lingpa ta go mare sing nga so tang san lasa ge ko mate so shira de ying de ri zang shi me du. And so this
is during Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa's lifetime that in Derge, which is far over in eastern Tibet, and remember that Jigme Lingpa was in central Tibet, Lhasa was quite far. But at the Derge Parkong, the printing house of Derge, they actually printed through woodblocks the entire collected works of Jigme Lingpa, which was a huge feat. And they offered to send all of those woodblocks to Lhasa for Jigme Lingpa. But Jigme Lingpa said, the folks here in central Tibet are not so interested. Just leave them there in eastern Tibet, where people are really following.
Yeah. And that number something kinkere. And Dzogchen Jigme Lingpa was a kamla pe amdo la parpe, amdo hyola parpe, tang hyatang amdo hyola pe. And Jigme Gyalwe Nyugu kamla sara zashu pe. De la ju. Teni dan the Jesus, Tapena, John Khenpo Wangpo, oh yeah, Anzum Drupa, La Sokpani, the Sokpa Chimbo, Ninka Juba Yongzok de, Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa, then 다단 직민친이 와서 단 직민 결혼이 그 균이 파로 그랬어.
And then as you all know, so his direct disciples, like there was Jigme Trinli Osa, the first Dodrupten Rinpoche, who was in Amdo, and then there was Jigme Gyalwai Nyugu, who was in Zachuka and Kham. And directly from those disciples, it went through Jamin Khyentse Wangpo, through Anzong Drukpa, all of the Dzogchen Ningtik lineage, directly through these masters, direct from Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa.
아니, 배나 빠투 rinpoche가 콩그 자올라마 직미 결혼이 그 남균 직미 링비고라 가리송고 요바데 치탄나 요레스 치탄나 가리송 요레스나 코울라마 링진 직미 링바는 돈도 땅 모기기 왕기 작파 마일바 적보상기 우나기 요레스 때 가리송으로서는 배나 로마도 잘라말라 다 또바체고 인장 그런 지 약본을 올라야다. 근데 샘고 이 무기 지니다 곰니 그 다바 약고야 김성기 아니 나랑 그 가세키야 바자 마임바 우유니서 그 돌아 상기나 요르스 에 야루니 그 바드르 버치라 된다 송도 봐. 어때 바드르 버치 이기나 된다 진짜.
And Patrul Rinpoche wrote, and Patrul Rinpoche's teacher was Jigme Gyalwai Nyugu, and Jigme Gyalwai Nyugu would often recall and remember to Patrul Rinpoche about Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa, and he would say, a lot of great praises and descriptions, and he would say, but none of this is just to increase your devotion. Often we hear praises of lamas to increase our devotion, but he said this is not to increase your devotion. This is just mere fact that Rigdzin Lingpa was really just like the Buddha, the actual Buddha present. No exaggeration. And so for all of us to be able to follow in his lineage, we're extremely fortunate.
Jigme Lingpa sonde pot goyo, pot go, jiglang pot go seni, derge la par go la pot chibu jigo goyo, kanjur go pot na yinji go goyo.
There are 9 volumes of Jigme Lingpa's teachings. They were printed first in Derge, and they're giant volumes, much like the Kangyur. They're 9 volumes altogether.
다가서 그 contact 네 나서 때랑 지당 옛날에가 네 다다 직바가 로토가 나라 직미 링바가 남터 쇼로 같은도와 이거는 대신 대체는 밑에 거기지요 총총대
The Chungchun go to Yomaring also Jamin Khyentse Choki Lodro di.
Okay, ni chuji lodro de tata chitang.
Okay. So we'll share in praise of Jigme Lingpa by Jamin Khyentse Choki Lodro.
Ta ko hier ji because nga ni ma hi. Pen na ni nga so tata ti jabjong de zama hie charwa. Ani ta de o ta de yige de ji ta wa ina ani de ni ga ta retro bris. Ta de
We've now heard some of the life story of Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa, and now this praise, then Khenpo can teach us sort of with that in the back of our minds.
Oh, that is that kunkin manya nangdun. Oh. Yeah, do just
slowly.
Yeah, start. Okay. Yeah, just. 단디 나라페나 군킨 망야 낭돈 직바고 지금이 링바 추니 덴바즈 키파 망야 주바 토바고 랑숑도 제 바빠사더샤 대송도 와스 데 가르송르스나 쩨땅근 키파다 망보요 이나 낭 그때 코는 낭돈 세우도 추니 그 니루 그 돈직바데 뇽뇽이레스 나 직미 링바데 추니 그 덴바통 세나 kom 팍팍을 람 우스 토바 사당볼라 추니 그 덴바토고 요르바 다 덴레레 송고 요레스.
So just as you can see in the English on your screen that there are many whose knowledge is universal but few who see the inner meaning, and Jigme Lingpa was somebody who really knew the very essence of the Dharma.
아니 키바 망양 주바 토바고 스테리 다 키바 저탄가 망나양 우니 그 주바 토브니더니 소소고 냠는 거 랑길라 조르와 꼴리데 랑종도르지든 지밀랑 버찬 예바르와
And the next two lines, that there are many scholars, but few who attain full accomplishment. And Rangjung Dorje, which is an epithet of Jigme Lingpa, with a self-arising Vajra, reached the exalted level of an Arya. So the first Bhumi, he was direct and full knowledge of the nature of Dharma.
Then the Ola Kipar Jangyang Mahlap Sibakon Chinzi Nyoko Chunum Rangrun Chin. Jatangan Kipar Jangyang said in detonator, Kipa Dendi Jani, the Shinkin Yorede. Mahlap ni Shidroka Yomar. Yena Chinzi Nyoko. Chinzi Nyoko is in a Jigme Lingpa Tsari. Pena they are Chinzi Osirian Lapi. Pena down the Tsixam Natakana, Tawa Longchenpa Jammin, Gomban Chinzi was there again. Joba Jaru Nyukuin, so the Chinzi was at the Jigme Lingpa. Then I indicate in Chinzi Nyukuti, Chunum Rangtu, Tata Galangi Laiba. Jimbi Thunder Troas, the Korang. Sim Tunji Nilu Tony, Chutam the Rangtu the Shibas. Rangtu Shibas.
Right, and then the following two lines, there are many who study and become learned, but few who understand without training. Khenpo Nyugu realized the self-liberation of phenomena. So, of course, he did learn, but his knowledge was self-arising. It was this natural, enlightened knowledge that he possessed. And Khenpo Nyugu is another epithet. So it's this natural, loving wisdom that was his nature. There are many epithets that you can find for him. Also, there was like Khenpo Osel, which means the clear light or the luminosity of loving wisdom and so forth. And what he knew was that self-liberating nature of all phenomena, that very essence of the Dharma. Longchen Rabjam sort of gave an example in his treasury of the Dharmakaya, the Dharmadhatu, that if you're standing at the top of the mountain, you have almost a bird's eye view that you can see everything, you can know everything. And in the same way, that Dzogchen knowledge is something that is sort of all-encompassing. Which is why he was called Khenpo Nyugu, that self-arising loving wisdom, who had the knowledge of the self-liberating nature.
Dari Jermi Churki Jermi Tansa Sona. Currently, no doctor songs. That it's it. She said that a took down the part Johnny, took down the Jangona, Namna Garna, Zoya Corioma, Lagni, Tamashi Droyo. No family look like Johnny, Tani, Kimbayana, Tamashi, Tixi control, the channel, Tixi control.
So another wonderful saying by Longchen Rabjam in one of his collected works, he says, these objects of knowledge that we learn, we can make efforts and you can be very diligent to study and to collect knowledge. But no matter how good at that you are and how much effort you make, you could never know everything. Whereas if you know the nature of the knowing mind, that contemplative knowledge, once that is known, you know one thing and you know everything, and that naturally opens to all knowingness.
So but the talk sonat ajang manta yang ngazu cetang jangwa yana yang Dzogchen dang den ji ge dawa de zo de de ha ko ni de ji go an ro ji yo na ji chanyi de Rigpa sena da yo ra dan chanyi Rigpa sena ga ro yin ji ge philosophy oh ti ring ro de ji la ji go a ji lang wa na pe li la ro ro yang de nga nyam nyam dang ni de de.
And it's said through a Dzogchen kind of knowledge, through that Dzogchen awareness that we cultivate in meditation, that even the kind of knowledge that takes effort, like the studies to learn philosophy and concepts like that, even that becomes easier. We retain that better. Khenpo knows this from experience.
对呢，你也晓得个老子说讲那个这个要上路被上进步是吧？
That's so.
这个他路动车是动车你也没，但你了，开始他被他让不了。
That's so.
那你用的被参你个大众这些的什么样希望都，他俺大爷，但俺从南京个就做现当我妈当，甚至大洲当定制当帝国外这个呢。 那空手为中车子到呢，这当个长马的还不马来的也那样，常常嘛空手这些讲个兴趣班的做下班来讲，说国外的大的啊当零车的我钱用个东西。
And Khenpo recently was reading the works of Lao Tzu, the Taoist sage from ancient China, and there are some, very sophisticated works of explanation, treaties that Khenpo's been looking at. And as a kind of Tibetan Buddhist scholar, you study your Dzogchen, and then you sometimes will compare it to the Madhyamaka presentation of reality and the interdependent arising explanation. And once you've kind of got your head around, these teachings, when you start to read something like Taoism and Lao Tzu's writings, you don't understand all of it, but actually it sort of gives you more access, makes it a little bit easier to understand the essential points.
Yeah, quand on a Dzogchen c'est va te ya bu ji to na chixi control c'est va te yong ko yore te Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa te cha su re.
So basically, if you have Dzogchen knowledge, you know one thing, you know everything. And that's what Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa had.
Yeah. Okay. Ta Gongchen Chenpo, Gongchen ma Rigpa ngonjur kun. Gongchen Chenpo na yi sa ser cho. That is something.
And there are many great meditators, but few who realize pure awareness. The great omniscient one arrived at the exhaustion of the four visions.
Roden che jang yandun jongwa kun. Lo git nam ki tamba katar dar. Tate dom jang do wa. Cherdang kun roden chen kan yore da roden chen che ge yore chang. Yana che ni yandun dun jur se te kacha kakar. 나랑 그 로든 제가 연세와당 원이 양달라 판토니 원이 판토라니 미쳤니 옛날 징미 링바 로든 제리 양든 양종리 로마로 죽게야 남카당 냠스 다다다 양장벌랑 그 강라 많다 양한지 닝마가 담바가 때완다고데 온친 징미 링바가 송래 되고.
And the next lines, there are those who act for beings, but few who secure the welfare of others. So there are many people that act for the sake of sentient beings. And then there are those who are really beneficial for others. And Jigme Lingpa was somebody who worked for sentient beings and really brought about great benefit for them. And this master's lineage of disciples spread the teachings until the far reaches of space. So, today in this world, anybody who's following the Nyingma lineage basically is a disciple of Jigme Lingpa.
Yeah. Baktrun Munro. Tan Zambalang la Kandi. 다 남바그 보지 남던 그 잡고나라 간지 자신보다 잡신보리 빠주 문도대 인진 증미 링바그 되니 문로그 자측대 저변나 점조당 심지당 도숨곰디당 참아드 자와데 링진 증미 링비 송란 이렇게 잡고와 어때.
And the Ngundro that Patrul Rinpoche's Ngundro, which is sort of born from the inspiration of Jigme Lingpa, is something so many people practice and is very cherished within Tibetan Buddhism. And many of the words are the root words of that, like the refuge, the bodhicitta, and so forth, were written by Jigme Lingpa. So, for example, remembering the kindness of the spiritual friend and the four thoughts that turn the mind to Dharma, these words were extracted directly from the treasury of qualities that Jigme Lingpa wrote.
Zomba Maya, Lashin Jongwa Kun, Lami Song of Yaloka songs. Kiranga song, the Santi song of Yinchidu, song yours. That is Jigme Lingpa, Yang Chang when is on Lotana. How Saya Nyingmapa. And then
the next lines, there are many works of literature but few that are well expressed. The Guru's writings are equal to the Buddha's words. So he wrote so much and so spontaneously, and it's all very poetic. So he had such an ability to poetically express these very like profound ideas that he was certainly very knowledgeable.
Dendrawi tini ketor nikti bombang chobingon, nikmiti ji bombang nam chongingombo, rama wanchi isiru watsa, jampal xinin dang, burma merja, uzu shumba na nimba chola, Jigme lang xiao la xiang sa lo song duas.
And the next lines in praise, we prostrate to the feet of Jigme Lingpa, who was inseparable, an actual manifestation of Manjushri Mitra and Vimala Mitra. And he was such a guardian who looked after Tibet in the degenerate age. And then another epithet, Pema Wangchen Yeshiro Paltsal, he was this powerful lotus, this expression of the play of wisdom.
Gyöanda dang tserub tamchi da kye dang manzhirwaran zhogni tuyi chigdindrini riba wazir kengang la dan kusum ludu zhonu bumku ngombar changchiba dashi shao song. Tati ngombar changchiba de pena Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa nangyang si ka nyangalin dawa de yang de dawa si ngondu kyrku yores. O de la monba res. De la res.
And then the final lines are expressing this great devotion and aspiration that we may never be separated from Jigme Lingpa in this or any future lifetime, and that we're always accompanied by the blessings of his wisdom mind, and that we merge with his wisdom mind and gain awakening in the youthful vase body, or in the luminous three kayas all are spontaneously present.
Tande chidang ge inji dang poyi ni ga yo pa dang nyong yen dang ka chang ga chun de pe chang mar to de long ngarang top nywa dreng me de si je chang i chen na ba de rang de long pito ko ma si.
So he's not sure with the English and the Tibetan, how they translate, but Khenpo, he's not considering this as a lung, because this probably in this context, we won't take this as a lung of that praise that we've just gone through.
Yes, tani kayina Jigme Lingpa ga son de dupa de long yor ni long chen dong yes ta ta chen na lo to na la yo jite.
And now Khenpo will just recite a very brief verse of praise to Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa. He can just speak spontaneously here. We don't need to share a screen.
Tan di chi hyolo kan de na la pe za chim bu chi yo ta de la ya jes ta te tin de na la yong yo te la go yo res ta.
So what Khenpo really wants to be saying is this shloka, this verse.
Kansana shisha kunkin rola jirti ter ta de kong shisha tam chin chen ba. Ani rola ji zewa chen chen tam chin la nyu ji yo ba de ji shi res. Di ji la zhe wo se yang ter yang zhu tuk de zo song o de le. Jig de dong dang ni song yo. Zhe wo se跟着龙庆人中跟前的吧，跟着龙庆人中被养猪吧人吧，等你突点建筑子呢，等你第多年吧，我对你个送多少，你知道吗？
And so this verse starts with two lines: the source of love and compassion for all beings, who knows all that is knowable. You are the emanation of Longchenpa and the heir to a treasury of mind termas. So the word in Tibetan for Longchen Rabjam is Drime Oser. And so it's saying two things. It's saying that Jigme Lingpa is his tuku, his reincarnation, and it's also pointing out that Jigme Lingpa is a tertun, a treasure revealer of all of that knowledge.
这种地方呢，龙庆人中国猪八人是吧？对了，当当你过来有的是，这个我那个猪八人吧，当这个也是一个几十种的是，几十种是呢。但我是现在有嘛的，的确几百嘛的。 옛날 양 콩상인 춤푸라 참라 주교 비가스 근kin 오저 건강라다 몽세람 좀그 예시지 그 탕마 섬라 지스종래 탕마 섬라 지스종한테 콩그 또주 출디 간칸세와당 딱 드리건 도나링전 Jigme Lingpa 랑기 냠낭 그 또주 냠낭 당저라든지 성위 남터 건강라 서로 지요레스 콩
And so in saying that he's a tuku, it's sort of, there are two levels to that. We can consider him a successor, but then although he wasn't living in the flesh at the same time as Longchen Rabjam, we can also consider him almost the wisdom body, connected directly to the wisdom body of Longchen Rabjam. Because when Jigme Lingpa was in retreat at Sami Chimpu, in that retreat, he had 3 direct visions of the wisdom body of Longchen Rabjam. He was completely and utterly present with him as in the form of wisdom. And this is written in great detail in Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa's Secret Namtar. He describes those visions.
Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa tukter senandra Longchen ning tuk tiga ta tichuyang di kamnite kongimara tichudiang tini babris manchiba.
So we can consider him almost like a mind, a revealer of mind treasure, that all of the treasured teachings of Longchen Rabjam, Jigme Lingpa revealed.
Jatangi Turku Sivatea, Natsu Namji Nata, Lamachik Johnson, the Namsi de Kansak Yambachi Kote, Turku Lapurda, only the Boba Turku Siva, the Techigu Maris.
When we hear the Tuku idea, generally we think some Lama passed and then his consciousness in a linear way was reborn as another person. But in Tibet, that's not exact. That's not the entire meaning of Tuku. That's a very limited understanding of Tuku. Because it happens in Tibet that even before a Lama passes, he will identify his own Tuku. That happened in the past in Tibet, and it still happens today.
Lama Gompate sena tuk tadi di yehiga chinji lamni on paru bote ranki ta durja dang chunli dang zapa changma de jong tabya ji ge nuba de chinji la phna ani de ya tuk chakyores.
So a very highly realized Lama, there's an ability for them to transfer kind of through some blessing, be able to impart their wisdom into another being that they can trust. And they're blessing the mind stream of that other being with their own wisdom and all of the ability to help tame and guide other beings. And so that's possible. And if we're wanting to look at the highest form of Tuku, that's really the best way.
Secret, you know, take money to Hansaya give them by Yomo. Namsi be Johnson give a tomboy and bring it by your mother. What if?
Because there might be a great Lama, like a Geshe or a Khenpo Lama, that passes and then is reincarnated as another human being. And that's wonderful. But, whether that next human being is of the same caliber of the previous one, it's, uncertain.
Jigme Lingpa Longchen Rabjam yehi koi jizon, chinji lao, wangkor, gompata, topa ngond churgo, ton tambi to create. Ton tambi so mayans.
The Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa is really considered the ultimate, most pure form of a Tuku of Longchen Rabjam. Completely merged his mind with one and received the entirety of blessings with a mind stream of Longchen Rabjam.
Tata nga so doya di tonton de consola inji yore.
Pachir yujimari samgyu.
Alelas. Ani nga so Jigme Lingpa tang jewi kork shiade ta rindo ji. Dang derang nga so shiade yang lop ba korwa. Je zang Jigme Lingpa korte ta tendi si chawki so.
And so that's some, discussion of Rigdzin Jigme Lingpa, the great being, on this special day. Okay, let's go, Khenpo. Chedam akarma nishu yore.
Let's.
Awesome.